Hey guys, and welcome to Monday Mornings with Michael. Today is May 30th, 2022, and guess what? It is also Memorial Day, so yes, it is a long weekend. Well, I should say a long weekend for some, because most of the jobs I've worked, I've always had to work on Memorial Day, but maybe you find yourself in a larger company or you're a federal employee, in which case you don't have to work today. So congratulations. We hope that regardless of what you're doing right now, that you have the chance to celebrate Memorial Day as it should be celebrated. And in getting started with this, we did want to kind of highlight some history on Memorial Day, because why not? It's one of those things that, if you grow up in America, maybe you learned a little bit about it, but most likely also not, because I feel like that tends to happen more often than not, that we are celebrating these things and we're like, oh, it's just an excuse for getting together with our family and to have a barbecue or to, wear some patriotic colors or say these things. But it's like, wait, how did this actually get started? And I think that is most interesting. So I will have the site linked for you in the show notes that I went off of if you want to read some more, but I picked up some different bullet points from that for this show for you. So it's from history.com, but you can go and check that out. But essentially, Memorial Day is honoring those who died while serving the country. The first one, so it's kind of, whenever you're coming to like when was the first holiday celebrated, it's kind of like, well, there's a couple different dates, but for the most part, it could be said that May 30th, 1868 was the first time it was celebrated, but back in those days, it was actually called Decoration Day. And kind of what, why this came up was it was after the Civil War, and the Civil War at that point in our history in the U.S. had been the war that killed the most people up into that point in our short history, the history of the country. And because of that, because there were so many dead people, they actually had to make the first national cemeteries for our country that they ever had. So if you go anywhere, on that side of the country, because I'm on the West Coast, but the East Coast, so like Washington, Virginia, I've been to those places, and I feel like that's where you see a lot of those national cemeteries. So yes, in that area, but those were the first ones because of this, and because of the Civil War, that's when they had to make these. And because they had all these national cemeteries, people would start visiting them and then like paying homage to those who had fallen and, all of that. And then from there, they started celebrating. And then in 1971, it actually became a federal holiday. And that was giving federal employees a 3-day weekend. So I feel like I was a little bit jumbled up in all of that because there's kind of a lot to it. But that was basically what I got from it, breaking it down, was like, oh, in 1868, it kind of first started where people were all coming together. And it was from the Civil War, because they had so many dead people. They put them in national cemeteries, and we still have those national cemeteries today. And a big part of Memorial Day was, and I don't think it is as much now, unless you are in those places of the country that have the national cemeteries, but is going to visit them. They would have like parades, celebrations, kind of like a memorial feel to it, of celebrating those and being thankful and grateful for those who fought for our freedoms and died for them. So these are the ones that actually died. We'll get to Veterans Day in a couple months, and those ones are still alive. These are the dead ones. So with that, let's keep going. I've mentioned before the last couple weeks that we do have chickens, so that is like the fun part of what's happening over here. They are now, this Saturday, so 2 days ago, they were 5.5 weeks, and at 6 weeks, they should be set to going outside. We have actually weaned them off of the heat lamp. That is something that if they were babies and they had a mother to take care of them, the mom would be sitting on them, and that would essentially be the heat lamp. But since we got them as chicks and without the mother there, which is very common, you use a heat lamp to keep them warm in like a 90-degree temperature, just about. Which it kind of makes sense if another being is sitting on you and they have an eternal temperature. I mean, chickens are probably not the same as us humans, but it would get pretty warm and pretty cozy fast. So when they're little, they have this heat lamp, and then as they get older, they develop their feathers, which helps keep them warm, and then you slowly wean them off of the heat lamp so that they can then be ready to go outside. And my parents actually constructed the chicken coop. It was a prefabricated one, but they primed it, they painted it, urethane on the inside wood parts, got it all set to go. It turned out that the kit itself was not that good and it had a lot of mistakes, and so they had to make a lot of adjustments and fixing things using our own tools to make new screw holes because there weren't them, or they were in the wrong places, using longer screws that we had because the ones they provided were no good. So just a lot of jumbling around due to a poorly designed kit. But in the end, it looks really great. I'll be sharing a photo on my personal Instagram later today, most likely. So if you want to check out the chicken coop, go and check that out. It actually matches the colors of our house. So it is very fun and very like, oh, the chickens have their own little white house for them because my last name is White and I live in the White House. Yes, of course, but on the West Coast. But the chickens are doing well. Now that they are getting their feathers, they're getting really soft again. So when they were babies, they were soft because they had all that fluff. And then in the in-between, it was kind of like their fluff was falling off and getting pushed out by the feathers. But now the ones that mostly have all their fluff gone, they are very soft and very fun to look at. And they are getting so big. It is crazy to see how fast they can grow. From there, though, I spent the weekend doing a lot of yard work, as always, not just for the lawns at my house and the two neighbors, because I have been doing the neighbor across the streets for at least a year, maybe almost 2 years now. And then another neighbor asked me to do his lawn because he saw me walking down the street with the lawnmower. So, I mean, if you ever want to get into lawns, just walk around with a lawnmower, because that in itself is very good advertisement. Because I'm like, I'm not asking people for, to do these jobs. It's just they see I have the tools. And that is like 90% of the trouble of doing your yard work is having the right tools to do it. So I already have, with my yard, 2 other yards. The other 2 yards I do get paid for like $10 to do the yard. So it's pretty easy, and it's just lawn. If I had to do a bunch of other pruning stuff, I'd be like, I would need some more money than that. But also, I don't know how much to charge, so I'm like, let's keep it simple and just do the lawn because it will make it look so much nicer. But I also spent the weekend, so on Friday and then Sunday, yesterday, doing yard work for another neighbor and cutting back like this huge hedge. And I spent a couple of days because it was a very long driveway and just kind of clearing out any weeds and really making it look nice. And it does look super nice today, which I'm super excited about. But I did see like it took so long, much longer than I would think. And kind of 2 things that I took from that is, the yard work hadn't been done in a long time. And when things get out of control, if you want to say in your life, if we want to go deep like that, it takes a lot longer to get back on track. And same with these plants, is that like if they are, and not just for this neighbor, because I've seen it in our yard too and in many other people's yards, is that, if you keep up with it, you only have to do very minimum work on like short periods of times as you go. It's not a big deal at all. But when things get out of hand, you're like, oh my gosh, I now have to spend days doing this. So I think that was always something interesting to look back on and to learn, especially while I'm doing it. I'm like, oh wow, like it is one of those things that you can take in life. Like if you keep going and you can take care of things, then it is so much easier and you'll save yourself headaches and frustration or just tiresome and being sore and I don't know, all of that down the line. All to say though too, I also picked up is that if I had the right tools for the hedges, it would have been so much easier. So that was another thing, another life lesson, that you do have to have the right tools, because I trimmed it all by hand. And surprisingly, I don't have a blister on one of my fingers, but I could feel like the hot spot where it was coming of just clipping too much. So I just switched to my non-dominant hand and just spent forever cutting back something that I didn't think would ever look as it should, but I ended up leaving that evening and it looked great. So I'll check on it again today and see like in the daylight, like I hope it still looks good, but I'm pretty sure it does. And then moving on from there, we'll talk about some things about the business as we keep on going, but the podcast. So as you should be well aware that this Monday Mornings with Michael show is also on our podcast now. So we have this show and then we have our weekly show, which will be kind of like the business segment, eventually the business interviews once we have some businesses who want to be interviewed. So once again, if you are listening and you would like to be interviewed and featured for free, go ahead and send us a message, send us an email, or apply on our website. But those will be on, recorded on Wednesdays, but then posted on this podcast on Thursdays. But we've seen great improvement. So far, we have almost hit $2, which is super exciting. Yes, I know it is a very low amount, but we hit the $1 a while ago, and that was super exciting. And now we are at like $1.96 as of this morning before jumping on the show, which means that by the end of today, we should hit $2, because I always listen back to the show just to give myself feedback and to listen to hear how it sounds. And then I know a number of other family members also will be listening or are listening. If you're listening right now, thank you. And that will get me a couple more pennies for not just me, but for the whole business. So that is something that is on the way, which if you listen on Thursday, then we will probably tell you like, hey, we hit the $2 mark. We are over $2, which is super exciting. But part of that is also getting us there much quicker because of adding the show to the podcast and kind of really seeing this cool thing like, whoa, this small number of people that were listening to the Thursday shows are now, from what we can tell, also listening to the Monday show. So that is getting double the points, double the pennies, double pennies sent our way. For our coloring book, we mentioned last time that we wanted to go ahead and have like not the final version, but all the like beginning sketches finished and digitalized for this coloring book that we're doing for FP Kids. We mentioned the characters' names, in the past. We said the girl character is Petaluma Blossom, and then the little mystical character, his name is Johnny Paul Todd. 3 names, Johnny Paul Todd. Yes, Johnny Paul Todd. So those are the 2 characters. We're creating kind of like their origin story, like how they meet, how things get started to kick us off. And so far, I think it's going very well. Last week, we actually got all the supplies out again, and we're starting to create sketches first by hand, because that was something that we learned, and we talk about that in the episode 4 with like getting your creativity back by unplugging from electronics. This idea that when we were little, and most likely yourself as well, you first learned to write and draw and use your creativity by hand using pens, pencils, crayons, color pencils, all of that with your hand on paper. So that's something that when I'm getting stuck creating digitally, I'm like, okay, I think we need to take some steps back and jump into things with how they used to be when I was first learning to draw and create and was getting good at all of these things, was with paper. So that's something I've used for this book, and it really is so helpful. And just being able to erase and then add little details with your pencil seems very obsolete, and like I could just push 2 fingers on my iPad and undo it. But eventually I found that when you get used to that, a lot of times you're undoing things much quicker on your iPad that maybe they could have been saved, or it's just impulsive, where if you have to put your pencil down and pick up an eraser, you really have to think about what you're doing. And the next time you pick up the pencil, you're going to want to be thinking even harder about what you're sketching out, because you're like, oh, gross, I'm going to have to erase this if it looks bad or if it's not good. All to say, though, we are almost done. I think we have like 2 or 3 more pages to sketch out by hand, and then from there, kind of what the process looks like is we'll use the iPad to take photos of those. We'll upload them onto the page, make the layer like kind of see-through. I think it's the opacity. We'll change that down so that we can then create a new layer over that, and then use a pencil tool to then sketch that onto it. And the reason we're doing that, I mentioned last episode where we talked about this, was because we're still trying to figure out like exactly what pen size and which pen in itself we want to use for doing like the final versions of it. But the hardest part, I guess, is always getting these first things onto a blank page. So if we can get, the pencil versions, the digitalized pencil versions onto the page, that will be the hardest part and the most work that we've had to do. And once we got that, it'll be so much easier to then kind of copy that same idea of creating a new layer, making the pencil layer more opaque. I don't know. Change the opacity. I don't use that word enough to know the different uses of the word the tenses of it or the different versions of that word. But, we'll make it kind of see-through and then use the final pen to go over it. And then from there, one thing we haven't even talked about, but we will be adding color, and that is a whole new ball game because we have not done anything like that with an illustrated book. This will be our first illustrated book, my first illustrated book as an artist. So that, I'm just thinking of it now, sounds very like, oh, it's going to be a lot of work. But the first step is to get the outlines, and our goal had been to get it, these digitalized pencil versions by the end of the month. So we have today, the 30th, and tomorrow is the 31st. So by Wednesday, we got to have it all done, and I think we will be able to. Hopefully today, we'll finish the by hand sketches so that we can start taking the photos, uploading them, and then tomorrow it's just tracing, which it does take more time than you would think, but it's less brain power, where when I'm creating from nothing, it is a lot more thinking and looking up reference photos and like, how should this be? Or like, why did I put a page here for a picture? I could have just put words instead, because at this point I'm tired of drawing pictures. But it is good because a picture should be there when I was thinking in a more clear and concise manner. So that is what we're doing with that. But I would say, kind of as we close this up, and kind of what to leave you with is that, in this case, giving a deadline really helps us like put the fire under us and be like, whoa, we wanted to get this kids section kind of launched, or at least fully formed as much as we can before launching it in the second quarter. And we are finishing the second month of the second quarter, which means we just have June left before, this quarter is done. So that in itself was like, oh my gosh, wow. Like we were doing a lot, and then it didn't feel like we were doing a lot. And then we weren't. And then it's like, okay, we are almost done. So we really have to keep going. So I would say, like, in anything you're doing in your life, like giving yourself a deadline that you can stick to and that is realistic is going to be so incredibly helpful, especially when it's on things you don't really want to do. So in this case, I think I mentioned that, I definitely do want to do this, but I always get stuck with like, I do a lot and then I stop. And then I'm like, I feel like I did so much, it should almost be done. And then I open it up and I'm like, I'm not even close to being done. And then it's too overwhelming. I'm like, let's close that again and not look at it for a while. So with stuff like that, and that has happened with a lot of the coloring books I've done, where I'm like, I like to do it, I want to do it, but getting there in the journey is very difficult for some reason for myself to get through it. So if you find yourself in instances like that, setting a deadline that you can stick to is so helpful and so important. And even if it's just for yourself, like you don't have to have a podcast where you're telling the few people who listen, like, this is what we're doing. But you can tell yourself, you can tell your families, if you have children, tell them like, hey, mommy or daddy, we're going to try to, in my case, it would be daddy if I had kids, like daddy's going to try to finish this coloring book by next week, which is when I shared with you guys the deadline I had. So something like that could even be helpful. And you can bet if you have kids, they will remind you. I'm sure they will if they can talk. But that idea of like finding someone that you can tell if you want to, or even just writing it down and putting it in a place that is prominent where you will pass by each day to remind yourself, that will be super helpful. I would also say, be kind with yourself, especially when it's stuff you don't want to do. You don't need to beat yourself up like, I'm not getting this done. I'm not like, oh, I'm awful. Like I can't do anything if it's not something you enjoy to do, like realize it's going to take so much more effort to actually do it. So you can be kind with yourself of like, yes, I'm falling behind, say on my coloring, this book. It's an illustrated book. It's not a coloring book. Got to start getting that into my vocabulary. But, like, yes, I am kind of falling behind, or like I stopped progress on it. And that is sad and a bit frustrating. But this is something that is a bit harder for me to keep going. The journey is just like a lot to do when I have so much other stuff going on that like, hey, you know what, Michael, it's okay. You're going to get it done, stay on track, but, be kind to yourself. You don't need to tear yourself down. And a lot of that goes back to how we always mention, like, being positive and optimistic. You can do that with yourself too. Not just to your brain or like your inner monologue, but like if you need to say it out loud, like go ahead, like who cares? If it will help you, then take that. The other thing I would say with some of you have, these projects or you're trying to get stuff done in your life is try to remember why you wanted to do it in the first place and then go from there. So if you need to make changes, then, okay, make some changes. And if it's not, if you wanted to say, in this case, say we wanted to do the illustrated book, but we remembered why we wanted to do it was just to get, say, our first book out. Then at that point, if the illustrated and coloring part isn't going good of adding color, we could say like, okay, let's rework this. And instead of having a fully illustrated children's book, how about we start with an activity book or a story coloring book so that the kids add their own color, which I can tell you I did that for the Christmas book that I did personally. So no, we're not going to do that for this one. But that's just an example of, you can find workarounds that can still get you to the overall goal of kind of the feeling and thought and like purpose of what you were doing without having to be so strict with sticking to it, especially on these projects that are for yourself and that are more creative or fun in nature, or say you're redoing one of your yards, the front or backyard. Like it may not be exactly how you pictured it, but hey, at the end of the day, if you keep going, are you going to get a nicely landscaped yard? Yeah, you're going to get there. And that was the overall goal, was to clean up all the weeds and mess that you had. It may not be the most extensive or exquisite. There we go. That is a hard word to say when you're on camera and recording with a microphone. Exquisite. I don't know. It still sounds wrong. But, it may not be that big thing that you pictured, but you're still getting there and you're still hitting the overall goal that you're wanting to, and you can always go back and add things on later. So even with the coloring book example, hey, I could go back and add color myself as the artist and come out with a new book that is not the coloring version, but is instead the 2.0 color, like illustrated book. So there's always ways too where you can go back and kind of rework things even after you finish. And then kind of the last few parts within this is that for this illustrated book, I found that getting the supplies out like a day before I was actually going to start doing it was super helpful. So I had these big sheets of paper. I got those out from where they were being stored with my pencil and my eraser, and then just kind of took a day to like look at it and see like, oh, it is there. I don't have the energy to do it today, but maybe tomorrow I will do it. And then I actually did. The next day I was like, okay, everything is out. I don't have these excuses to make like, oh, I have to find the paper. I have to find that pencil because I liked that pencil and that eraser, but I don't know where they went. So, coming up with all these excuses, and I found like you can like very easily come up with excuses because you will be tired. You will not have the energy to do it. You will not really want to do it. If this is one of those things that I mentioned, like in my case, where it's like, it's really like pushing through the hardest part, which I would say is kind of right now, to then get to where things speeden up again. But if you get everything else out that you need, so if it's for yard work like the day before, get all your tools out and get everything set so that the time comes, say it's the next day, to actually do the work, you've taken out, maybe it's just 20 minutes of getting things out, but hey, you saved yourself that energy, the thought that you would have to go into like picking out, what do I need, what should I get, and it is much less like overwhelming. The other thing within that, and I think I heard this from a different podcast maybe a year or so ago, but it was saying that like anytime you make decisions in your day, like you're having to use brain power, we'll call it that, and thought to do so. And eventually the more decisions you're having to make in the day, the more like, say, full your brain gets and tired of making these decisions, and it becomes harder and harder and harder to make these decisions. So by preparing and getting all the stuff out that you need, you are taking away a lot of these elements and hurdles that would be using your thought and your brain power. And I know that's why, say, because I do get up super early, I put all the clothes out that I'm going to wear the night before. I have like the pillows set in the right stack for making my bed so that when I wake up, it's pull the sheets over, the pillows are already in the right section so I can put those on. I already have the clothes that I need to wear, I put that on. So it's less decisions that I would have to make of, should I make the bed today? Oh, I'm tired, it's 4 a.m. I don't really feel like it. And then going back and forth, wasting time. And then what should I wear? I usually wear the same thing for work, but I could change it up because technically I can wear many different colors of clothing items, but I stick to being simple. And then the next thing, what should I have? Like, I just have a banana. That's what I do. And so I've already made that decision, so I'm not thinking and pulling apart things in the kitchen. I'm like, what should I make this morning at 4:30 now, but I have to leave in 15 minutes. All of these small things add up, take a lot of time. They cause you to think too much, and especially in the early morning, it can be tired. But likewise, if you're like most of the time that I have for the creative projects doesn't start till early afternoon. So I've already worked, I've walked the dogs for an hour, done the training with the one dog, and then I've eaten, in which case a nap sounds really nice. And maybe I'll take a nap. But that means then once I come up from the nap, I really have to hit things running, and I'll only have a few hours to really get good work in. So if I'm doing all of this stuff, I need to make it as easy for myself as I can to actually get what I need to done. All to say though, I hope that is helpful for some of the next things you're doing in your day or throughout your week, or if you go by a quarterly system too, then you've got just about a month to go in this quarter. So see like what can you get done? What can you do? But keep these things in mind that I spent the last maybe, I would say 5 minutes, but I feel like it was almost maybe 10 minutes going over. But those are just things that I have found super helpful, and I'm actually living out right now with this illustrated book. So I'll be sure to share more updates with you on this journey next Monday, because I think it is really cool to kind of hear progress of what we're doing with the company, especially when we're implementing our own advice and sharing like what we're learning, so that you then can learn and implement this in the things you are doing in your life. And always feel free to message us, let us know what you're doing, the projects you're working on. We are here to encourage you, help you out in any way we can. We do have a lot of good free resources on our website if you're thinking about starting your own business in any capacity, or maybe that's one of those things where you're like, I want to think about starting my own business. Well, hey, we've got a lot of good documents showing the process of what that looks like, some of the costs associated with that. You can find that on our website. But overall, as we close things up, we do want to wish you a very happy Monday, a very happy Memorial Day. Take some time to think about the freedoms we currently have and those that have died, to give them to us. I also think is so fascinating about the whole National Cemetery thing. That is something I didn't know, so check out the link that I'm going to share in the show notes as well. But remember, keep a positive and optimistic mindset. Tell yourself that you can do it and that you are going to get a lot accomplished today. And not only today, but this week and the next day and the next day. And don't forget to, if you hit a part in your day where things don't seem to be working out and things seem to all be going wrong, or you get in that like, why am I the only one? Or everything bad is happening to me. Tell yourself, no, stop that right now. Today is still going. We have much more in the day, and we are going to break the day right here and acknowledge like, yes, that part was bad. Life can suck sometimes. But we are starting a new part of the day in which none of that matters, and the day can still be saved. The day can still be good. So keep that in mind. It is much harder when you're first getting started with that kind of mentality, but if you can really keep that up and work on practicing that, it will make such a big difference in your days and as you go. So with that, we are going to sign off. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope you are encouraged to go out and do some cool things in your life and actually get them done by using some of the tips we've shared. But we will see you later.